So let's jump in. So we're talking about hybrid cloud disaster recovery for Nutanix workloads today. So I've been in the backup and disaster recovery game a long time now, longer than I care to admit. Um, but only recently with Nutanix actually. So when I joined HYCU last year, it was kind of like my introduction to Nutanix. I was a VMware guy beforehand and worked at various places doing disaster recovery and backup and data protection for VMware and those typical workloads. And actually, I was quite amazed how different the Nutanix world was compared to VMware and other virtualization technologies I'd worked with. So some of the challenges that we've come across and seen, or I've seen, the first one is the obvious one, right? Cyber risks. So we've got an ever increasing risk profile, an ever changing set of resilience profiles we need to try and meet. And often cyber is going to get prioritized over the traditional disaster recovery. And that's not to say that we shouldn't prioritize cyber. It's just to say that actually a lot of these things go hand in hand together, right? So we can't just forget that traditional disaster recovery, so things like power outages, fires, floods, natural disasters, those types of things still happen. Luckily, I'm from part of the world in the UK where we don't really have much natural disasters. We don't really have hurricanes and tornadoes and earthquakes, but guess what? The rest of the world does, right? So we still need to make sure we are prepared for those things, but we also need to make sure that probably the biggest risk in our organization is still covered and is still looked at and getting the attention it needs, which is the cyber risk as well. So it's how do we balance that and how do we make sure that the work we do in one place can play in the other sphere as well, and not just two silos of what happens when we have a fire flood versus what happens when we have a ransomware attack, for instance. Those things can overlap and do overlap quite critically as well. The second one being potentially costly hardware, right? The large cost to run a secondary site. We all know every organization in the world at the moment is going through kind of like a budget constraint and making sure we try and do more with less and how to become more efficient, how to become, really streamlined. That secondary site may or may not be applicable. It might be something that the management or the C level or the board think actually that's something we could potentially strip back. But then we don't want to drop out from the resilience profile we currently have, right? If we get rid of the secondary site, how are we still going to maintain an effective disaster recovery and cyber resilience strategy as well? Vendor lock-in. uh, Ever since the Broadcom takeover of VMware, I think people have really been, hypersensitive towards vendor locking. Um, we all know that's had, a big impact on the industry. A lot of people are now moving workload to cloud, to Nutanix, right, to other hypervisors, to SaaS apps, to cloud native, to all these different places, right? And our organizations, they've always been, kind of sensitive to vendor lock-in, right? Making sure they had exit strategies, but never really took them that seriously, right? It was always a case of, oh, VMware will be fine. We know what we're paying. We might have the 5 or the 10% increase yearly, or whatever it might be at renewal. But now suddenly they got hit with that big kind of, oh my God, this can happen in our world. Now organizations are looking at it and going, okay, we need to make sure we mitigate against what we know can happen now. So now we're looking at disaster recovery, but also data mobility. And how do we make sure we have mobility across potentially different platforms, different providers, potentially even whole different ways of working. So that's something that we have to be aware of, again, whilst maintaining our risk and resilience profiles. And we're really good at doing disaster recovery and resilience for VMs, right? We've come a long way in the, I don't know, the 15 years I've been looking at it, if not even longer. And we're getting really good at those pieces now. Obviously, it's still changing and ever changing, and it won't ever stop changing. But actually, we also need to look at the conversation around SaaS, cloud, and obviously now AI workloads, right? These things aren't immune to disaster recovery. They're not immune to cyber resilience threats. So we need to make sure we have the conversation about those things as well. Obviously, in this topic today, we're talking about Nutanix specifically. But obviously, if you know HYCU and if you know kind of our story and what we do in the platform broader, we can help you cover all of these things as well. So I just wanted to start off with a little bit of a customer story, So there is a better way. I like to title this one. I'm not sure that's what it's officially called in the in our case study book, but a customer scenario. So there's a healthcare provider. They're providing services to over 120,000 patients in regions. They were moving from an alternative hypervisor and storage solution, which was a 3-tier architecture, to Nutanix hyperconverged infrastructure. And they were using a popular backup and recovery tool for the disaster recovery and their backup workloads, right? And when they moved, they realized they had some drawbacks in place. So their existing tool was not designed for Nutanix. It was designed for the workload previously, right? How it was sat on that hypervisor, how it interacted with that storage, how all of those, APIs and the ways that they developed it against that. It then had a really hard to use UI. Like, it was a bit cumbersome, a bit old, not particularly intuitive. Definitely didn't feel like an up-to-date and modern product like Nutanix does. It was far more complicated than the team had time for. So typically, when the team doesn't have time to do things get missed. The list of things to do just gets reduced, and suddenly your resilience profile, your DR test didn't get done, or your backup testing didn't get done, or we weren't checking the reports as vigorously as we should do, because things are complicated. It draws more time, sucks that out of the team, and then eventually you just don't become as good as what you could be if you had a simpler tool. There were big interoperability challenges, and with large gaps in protection as well. So, as we all know, Nutanix isn't just about virtual machines. It has a whole platform of use cases and ways of running infrastructure. And there were big things that were missing. Remote sites was a big one for this particular customer, and how they protected those remote sites just wasn't plausible, just wasn't feasible with their old solution. And they had no real easy way of testing DR properly. They didn't really have a good way of doing it. They did it, but rarely and not well. And we're going to come on to the kind of the HYCU solution and how we solved and some of the benefits that they got from that a little bit later on. But I kind of want to discuss disaster recovery the HYCU way, and kind of how we do things and how we can help, and what we can do to implement disaster recovery in a Nutanix environment. So we kind of have three pillars. This kind of applies across all of our products and solutions, not just for disaster recovery, but when we really boil it down, we want to be simple and effective. We want to be easy to set up, and the whole tools boiled down into a single drop-down box, which we'll see into in a demo later on. There are whole disaster recovery tools designed to move you from VMware to Azure or Nutanix to wherever else might be, right? And we're trying to make it as simple and as easy as possible, combine it down into organizations that want a consolidated view, platform, way of working. So when they know they have backup or disaster recovery needs, HYCU is the solution they turn to. It needs to be cost effective. As we've mentioned before, the budgetary, constraints of organizations aren't going away. Typically, disaster recovery is one of those places that gets kind of like chipped away at over the years, right? It's kind of one of those things. It's not a luxury. I hate to describe it as a luxury, but it's one of those things that's kind of like out of sight, out of mind, because hopefully we never have to use it, or hopefully it's one of those things that's rarely used. It's one of those insurance policies we kind of think, oh, maybe instead of going with the gold standard cover, we could go with a silver or a bronze and still be protected and still have the right way of working. But actually, we could potentially save, potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars or millions of dollars, depending on the size of the organization, if we downgraded that service from gold to bronze, for instance. So, for instance, in the HYCU world, we don't require any additional components to be deployed, right? So we don't require any additional hardware or software, or even anything running in the cloud on a continuous basis if you want to do DR to the cloud. So kind of like that cost profile dramatically reduces if you start to use HYCU for disaster recovery as well. And then maintaining flexibility and control. Again, two big themes that came out of many of the conversations I have with C-level or board members or IT directors is, hey, we want to have control over our data. It needs to be sovereignty and control as well. So I need to maintain control over the data path at all times. It needs to be sitting where I want it to sit at all times. And I need to be able to choose. It can't be the software choosing for me. It can't be, oh, we only support this way of doing it, or we only can work in this way, or it's optimized for working with this particular vendor. It should be, what's your choice, Mr. Customer or your organization? What do you want to do? HYCU is going to enable that for you. So we're becoming an enabler rather than a limiter. So hybrid multi-cloud protection with HYCU. So this is going to be, I'm going to say traditional DR again. I don't mean it in a bad way, but two sites or two physical sites, or even up into NC2 in Nutanix as well, which is an amazing piece of technology. We've actually done a whole webinar on HYCU and NC2, which you'll be able to find on our website somewhere. Maybe if one of my team are listening, we can pop the link into the chat for you guys to look at that one at some point as well. But essentially, HYCU sits as the data mover, right, between data mover and the orchestrator between Nutanix environments. But it doesn't have to be Nutanix environments, and we're going to cover that in a second as well. But if we focus on Nutanix for a moment, right, we can be the movement between all of the workloads you have, so that, be it AHB, AHV, NDB, volume groups, your object storage. We can back up and replicate your object storage to a different place as well, whilst keeping backups of it as well. Because quite often people will go, okay, but I can replicate my object storage. I can replicate my volume groups. Yes, you absolutely can, right? But how many copies can you keep of them? Are they going to be immutable, and are they going to be recoverable granularly? All those types of things. So those things kind of come into the backup and disaster recovery play rather than just the replication piece, right? The same for AHV and NDB. Those types of conversations we have with customers is, yep, you can use Nutanix replication, and actually HYCU bolts directly into Nutanix's replication technology. So if you're replicating from site A to site B, you can actually utilize HYCU to back up from site B. So we're never actually touching production workloads. Or if you've got 20 robo sites, or 50, 100, 200 robo sites around the globe, all coming in centrally to a hub system, we can back up all of those from the hub without having to go out to the spokes and use bandwidth and duplicate data copies of those types of things. So we have this deep integration with Nutanix. And then into the NC2 world, we can help you move into NC2, push your VMs out there, back them up while they're there, bring them back down again as well. And all of this through the single HYCU platform. You don't have to then deploy another HYCU instance in NC2 if you don't want to. You can have dedicated instances. It's kind of the flexible approach that we've been telling people. You decide what's best for your organization. Our engineers and our architects and our customer success team will be able to tell you, hey, what do you want to achieve? And if your answer is, I want, ultimate resiliency, I want, minimum amount of downtime, the fastest possible backups and disaster recovery. Okay, here's how you deploy HYCU and Nutanix to achieve that. Or if your organization is saying, actually, I need to cut costs and I want to reduce my cloud footprint, I want to reduce my cloud spend, and I want to do this, this, and this, we can say, hey, this is how you architect HYCU and Nutanix to best offer that situation. And then if you want to exit out of Nutanix for whatever reason, a lot of customers don't. A lot of customers stay within the Nutanix ecosystem because it's incredibly strong. But a lot of organizations are mandating an exit, right? Mandating a way of moving. So it's probably not ever going to be used, or not used in angst anyway, but it's there as an option. And again, disaster recovery can play a part of that puzzle as well. So if we start looking at cross-hypervisor and cloud disaster recovery, so from Nutanix or from any of these environments, actually, we can actually do the cross-hypervisor or cloud disaster recovery. So from Nutanix, we can move to VMware, we could move to Azure, we could move to Azure Local, we could move to AWS, GCP, Azure, all of these places back into Nutanix, back into VMware. So we can kind of be that, I don't want to call it proxy, but that kind of like malleable instance that you go, actually, I'm going to run some workloads in AWS and I'm going to run some Nutanix workloads. And if I want to move between the two, I can do. Or actually, I am moving off VMware and adopting Nutanix. I'm going to use HYCU to not only protect me during my migration, but actually help me migrate some of my data as well. Or actually, I'm shutting down my secondary site of VMware and I want to use Azure as my disaster recovery site. We've got you covered on that part as well. So kind of the complete interoperability between all of these hypervisors and clouds gives you that ultimate flexibility. And I'll show you later, you don't actually even have to pick what you want to use before you implement it, right? You can actually back up to wherever you want and then spin it up to these environments as long as they're connected, right? So that's another massive benefit. So we're application-centric disaster recovery. So we can do, as I've mentioned before, disaster recovery to the cloud, cross-hypervisor DR. We can do cross-regional disaster recovery in the cloud. So if you're running AWS, you can go cross-region with HYCU. We can also do disaster recovery for those more modern services. So like I mentioned earlier, it's not just about VMs anymore. We're about those functions or that blob storage or that object storage, whatever it might be, platform as a service, database as a service, those types of things. We can do disaster recovery for those modern services as well. And also disaster recovery for SaaS applications, which again, most people think, how do I even go about that? How do I even go about doing disaster recovery for SaaS? Well, come speak to the experts, come speak to HYCU. We can help you with that. And then the biggest one that I'm seeing a lot now is cloud repatriation. People are, adopting, especially in the AI era, are adopting Nutanix for those GPT in a box, that Nutanix AI experience, because it's incredibly expensive to do AI workloads in the cloud. So if you do have a Nutanix environment, bringing those workloads back down to crunch through and to store large amounts of data sets, it does make a lot of financial and economic sense to do that. And then our big differentiators, zero agents across all of the workloads you see, across even physical machines, zero agents to install, zero proxies to run and manage. So you don't have to worry about 15 different components, which one's sized correctly, which one's deployed correctly, which ones are talking to each other, which one needs patching, which ones needs updating, all of those things, no need to worry about it, no proxies at all. If you're doing disaster recovery to the cloud, we have no permanent compute running in the cloud. So you have no appliance running in the cloud. We have no proxy or nothing running up there that's going to consume compute 24/7. At the point that you decide to invoke disaster recovery or invoke a test or invoke movement into those areas, of course, we spin something up and do the data movement and spin it up and do that there. But it's not running burning resources 24/7 in a just in case basis. It's just designed to be super efficient. And again, if you're using things like Nutanix replication, we don't duplicate the data. Or again, if you're using, let's say we're doing disaster recovery to AWS, but you also want to store your backups in Amazon S3. Well, guess what? The backups we store in S3 can also then be used for disaster recovery. So we don't have to duplicate data. We don't have to have a data set for backup and a data set for disaster recovery. We can use that same data set to recover in either instance, whether it's a single file or 100 instances. We can use the same set of data for that. And when we do disaster recovery to the cloud, we call it spin up to cloud. So you'll see inside the UI later on when I show you, it's called spin up, which is quite cool. So the full failover, failback, and migration workloads are supported natively in the platform. So, if anyone who's not familiar with those terms, a failover typically is from Nutanix or wherever else up into cloud provider. Failback is, you guessed it, coming back. So let's say it's something proactive like a hurricane. Maybe you're in Florida and or Texas or somewhere, and there's a hurricane or a storm coming. You want to move up into West Coast region of AWS to run your workloads for a week. You can proactively fail over into that environment, run your workloads there, and then HYCU can then fail you back into your Nutanix environment. And even if you add more VMs while you're running there, we can still fail those back as well, even if they're born in the cloud as well. Or if you're planning a more permanent one, we can do a migration up into those clouds as well. As I mentioned before, we have no idle compute costs, nothing burning your credits or your CFO's cash, just running there on a just in case basis, right? None of that. We support all major public clouds, so that would be GCP, AWS, Azure, and we also support all of the NC2 environments on those clouds as well, including the new one that's just been launched in OVH Cloud as well. And OVH Cloud use HYCU for their preferred backup vendor for all their Nutanix environments as well. And the biggest thing here is your customer retains control. So you guys retain control of your data. You're not spinning up into our cloud. You're not spinning up into someone else's cloud. If you trust a partner or a service provider to provide that service for you, absolutely, you can still use HYCU. We have HYCU service providers that can run it on your behalf if you want, but it's always a customer choice. It's never failing over into something that we choose, or where it goes is where we choose. It's where you guys configure where you want it to go. Typically we do see customers running in their own tenancy. And even if that's their own tenancy in someone else's cloud or someone else's colo, typically it's still going to be in your control. So hopefully that all makes sense. I'm just going to pause for a second and see if we've got any questions. Do I have any numbers or bench of time to restore GB to NC2 from object storage? It's a big, massive, it depends. I can't really give you numbers in terms of the time it takes because it's, what tier of storage is it? S3 or is it Azure? Where are you recovering to? Which, if you're going from AWS S3 and you're recovering into, Azure NC2, it's going to obviously take more time because it has to move the data across. But typically, if you're replicating into any NC2 environment, it's normally pretty quick because the data can stay in NC2. Even better if you keep it on Nutanix objects as well, because we work really well with Nutanix objects as well. So, but hey, we can do a free POC or a demo, or install it in your environment, and you can test these things as well if you want to do that. So, hopefully that's answered your question. If not, put another question in, I can answer again. So let's move on. So I want to cover a brief topic, which I know you probably everyone's going to roll their eyes at, but but I can't really ignore it, and I can't really ever ignore it, especially when we're talking about disaster recovery, because it is likely to be the biggest threat to most organizations, and probably likely to be the most likely trigger in an organization to invoke their DR plan or their cyber resilience plan, which typically involves restoring a lot of data to a different place, even back to the same place potentially, but likely going to be a different place on clean infrastructure, which resembles disaster recovery, right? So cyber resilience is something we do need to talk about. So in HYCU, we have HYCU R Shield, which is our our cyber resilience fabric that runs throughout the whole of our HYCU R cloud platform. So that is for all the way from the Nutanix piece running, our hardened Linux appliance with all the backup posture management to make sure your buckets are secure, to make sure you're running MFA properly, all the way through to anomaly detection in stat apps like Okta, how many objects have changed on a daily basis that looks anomalous. We're going to tell you about that kind of thing as well. All of that is throughout the whole platform. It's not a bolt-on, not something you need to configure or purchase or add into the as a separate bolt-on item. It all comes as part of it. There's certain pieces that you need to configure, right? So if you want to do threat hunting or malware scanning, then you need to configure that. But the whole fabric isn't something we just bolt on. You don't have to go and buy HYCU R Shield, right? It's built into the platform that you're deploying. And I just want to cover one piece before we go into a demo. I want to try and keep this a little bit shorter today. So I want to do maybe 10 minutes of demo and give you guys a little bit time back for today, or answer all your questions that we hopefully have. So if you're looking for malware scanning or threat hunting, right? HYCU does that for Nutanix and does it incredibly well. We do it differently to most other backup vendors. In fact, I think pretty much every backup vendor we do it differently too. So we do rapid detection. And what does that mean? That really means that detection is done at the source. So we don't actually back up the data to like an S3 bucket or an appliance or something like that and then run scanning. What we do is we run the scanning using the Nutanix snaps, which, as you know, if you don't know, incredibly clever piece of technology there, redirect on write. Snapshots has no impact on production workloads. We then mount that to HYCU and scan it on the Nutanix platform. So obviously you get to control how much resources it uses. Obviously, we don't want to run away with resources, but we just scan those. But because it's being done on production grade kit with production grade storage, etc., the scanning is going to happen far, far quicker than if we're sending metadata to the cloud or trying to read from, slow disks, or even worse, telling people that they have to buy flash appliances because that's the only way we can get the scanning done, right? So again, all about flexibility and choice. The biggest thing again, data control. Data is always sits inside the customer environment, never leaves their control, never leaves their sovereignty. Even metadata, right, completely stays within the Nutanix environment. It never ever goes out to anyone's cloud, anyone's other environment for scanning or even for analysis. It's there right there in your Nutanix environment. So great for highly secure environments or people who just want to, take over control of their data, which is becoming more and more popular. And we do a double protection. We analyze the real data. So if any of the techies are listening, we use YARA rules. So we do a full YARA scan of the data sets. We don't just look at metadata and match metadata. We do a full scan. And then we also use indicators of compromise, such as anomaly detection as well, to kind of give you a two-pronged attack to be like, okay, my scan's clean, but actually the backup was much, much larger than yesterday. The change rate was much higher based on a standard deviation we set for this workload. So maybe we need to look into that a little bit more details. And again, backup storage independence, flexibility, and choice for you and your organizations. We can scan data no matter where it's going to. HYCU doesn't sell storage. We're not a storage organization. We're not a storage company. If you've seen any of our any of our leadership, especially Simon, our CEO, he'll just stand up and say, we're not a storage company. We don't sell storage. We are a backup, recovery, cyber resilience company. So you guys choose which storage you want to use. So we are completely independent. So this scanning can happen if you're sending it directly to S3. It can go directly to Nutanix objects. It could go to a Dell data domain. It could go to tape if you wanted to. It goes to NFS. It can go to anywhere you guys choose, but the scanning can still happen. We don't force you down the route of buying proprietary hardware or proprietary appliances they're incredibly hard to get off of or become incredibly expensive once you start actually storing large amounts of data on them. Completely down to you guys. You can chop, you can change, and you can even do direct to cloud, as I've said, and still maintain scanning as well. So massive, massive benefit for you guys using the product, and hopefully for your management and C-level and above as well. So before I jump into demo, I'm going to look at the questions as well. We've got 3 questions. So yeah, perfect. Interest in a POC? Absolutely. You can provide the NZ2 cluster. Yeah, perfect. So actually at the end of the webinar, we've got a poll which I'll put up, and you can register your details in there. If not, you can scan or get in contact with us as well. So you mentioned one more person. So you mentioned public cloud support for AWS, Azure, and GCP. Does HYCU support Wasabi the way Veeam, Convert, Rubrik, they're drawing their menus? Yeah, I'll show you that in a second, actually. So the short answer is yes. And what I mean by we support AWS, Azure, and GCP is that you can run workloads in those public clouds, right? Wasabi provides storage, but you can't run workloads inside Wasabi. It's only hot cloud storage they provide. But we support them for the storage targets, absolutely. Very, very good partners with Wasabi. We have a lot of happy customers using HYCU and Wasabi together. So let's jump into a demo very quickly, and that might prompt some more questions for everyone. How are we doing for time? Half past, perfect. So let's just X out of this, open up my web browser, give it a quick refresh. I'm sure it's timed out. Always does, eh? Perfect. So if anyone hasn't seen HYCU before, this is HYCU. If anyone is familiar with Nutanix environments, you will likely notice that it looks incredibly similar to Nutanix Prism. That is not an accident. We purposely designed it that way, so people who are familiar with Nutanix are familiar with the UI, familiar with the workflows and the way it works. So hopefully you can kind of see the similarities and see how simple and easy it is, just like Nutanix is incredibly simple and intuitive to use. So let's jump straight into kind of like how we would do some of these restores, how we do disaster recovery. My VPN wasn't working today, so we have a kind of an orchestration tool that sits outside of the platform. My VPN wouldn't connect, so I can't show you that today. But hey, if you sign up or ask for one of the demo from one of the engineers or the CSMs, the customer success teams, they'll be able to show you that and kind of show you how we do orchestration and bulk recovery, those types of things. But I'll just kind of boil it down into how do we do it for like a single VM, for instance, or a group of VMs. So the first thing I want to just check, let me just find the VM that we've got. So this VM here, I'm going to choose this VM. So we want to check to make sure the backups have happened, right? So, okay, we've got all of our restore points here. You can see it was a full or it's an incremental. The backup happened and it sent it to my NFS target. It was actually based upon a snapshot. And a key metric for most organizations is RPO, RTO, right? So whether it's backup or disaster recovery, that's going to be a very, very key metric that we need to make sure that we can uphold. So at HYCU, we do this automatically for you. So there's no schedules, there's no kind of worrying about it, no trying to figure out when have you got to schedule something to make sure it finishes in time, all that kind of stuff. You set it and forget it. And I'll show you that in the policy in just a second. But essentially in the compliance tab here, you can see we want to back up every 1 day, or the time since our last successful backup has been 23 hours, 45 minutes. So we're inside our time, no worries. And we need to recover within 5 hours for this particular workload. And our estimated time for recovery, you can see on the screen there, is actually 1 minute. So incredibly quick restore capabilities for the platform here as well. And then we want to know, was the backup successful? It was full, it's crash consistent. This much changed, this is how much we compressed it, this is where it went to. And this is the ID if you really need to know. But for most organizations, the next stage is going to be the critical piece. This is whether it's doing backup or disaster recovery, or if we're trying to restore from a ransomware attack, for instance. Is my data clean? So right in the same workflow, in the same place we were going to click restore data, we can say, by the way, the anomaly detection is fine, but actually we've scanned this disk and we've seen 2 files on these disks with these disks IDs that are suspicious. So we've done those full scanning. We can look at them. You guys can then send this off to your red team. This will automatically sent via a webhook to ServiceNow or your SIEM or your source systems for your cyber teams or your security teams to investigate as well. And if you feel like it's fine, you can then come in and you can mark it as clean if you want to, right? So you can mark them as clean, manual override. Yes, it's safe, it's been cleaned up, or it's nothing. It's a false positive, if you will. But right in that UI there, you can see how you would recover data, but also making sure you're recovering clean data. Because the last thing you want to do is recover up into the cloud after a ransomware attack, for instance, and then you just reinfect your cloud environment with the same attack, right? We want to make sure we're recovering clean data into there. So if we undo this filter and we'll look at the VMs that we have available to us, you can see some of them have DR ready. So this means that we've already validated that it's going to work in going up into AWS or GCP in this instance for this particular VM. We've already got the storage up there. We're storing the data over in that environment, and we're ready to go, ready to rock. But even if you didn't, it doesn't stop you. So I'm just going to pick this random VM here that we've got here. I'm going to pick the latest restore point we have. Oh, for some reason, not going to let me do it now, is it? And we can just spin up to cloud. So picking this VM hasn't got the ready symbol, but we can still spin up to cloud. So we can take this VM, and it's probably stored on our NFS storage or something, or Nutanix objects on-prem, and we can still choose to spin it up to AWS, GCP, Azure, or even Azure Government as well. So if you have a particular need, or this VM is infected, or you want to see how it performs in the cloud, whatever, you can then do disaster recovery or migration or into those cloud environments on demand as well. And then if we look at the same way of doing that for doing recovery in a cross-hypervisor recovery, for instance. So we take our virtual machine, we recover. We're going to do the whole virtual machine. We want to do a clone of the virtual machine, right? So we don't want to restore it to the original location. We want to clone the virtual machine. Or potentially, actually, we want to just validate to see if it's working. But in this instance, let's look at clone. So we're cloning the virtual machine. So we're going from our Nutanix source, but actually, I can go to a Hyper-V cluster. I can go to my vSphere environment. I can go to my Azure local environment, or even a particular or a different Nutanix cluster altogether. Could be an NC2 cluster, could be a cluster on a different geographical site, could be RoboSite. But essentially, we're boiling all of that down into this one dropdown, right? All of that configuration, migration of data, translation from a Nutanix AHV VM into a Hyper-V VM or even a vSphere VM, and vice versa, right? All of that is being boiled down into a drop-down box. That's how we like to simplify things. You don't have to set it all up, it's all ready. So we just go there, we click next, we go, okay, where are you going to put it? So we're going to put it on this data store, the store from the backup. Cool. We're going to give it a new name potentially because it's going to go into a different platform. We can use the original VM configuration. Yes, no. Very simple to understand. Which networks are we mapping? Are we powering it on? Are we keeping the MAC address, etc., etc.? You can see there. And all you then do is click your restore, and we're doing all the hard work for you, right? So that cross-hypervisor restore, that cross-hypervisor migration you're trying to achieve is now a very, very simple wizard, very simple and easy to do. And this can be all automated from our orchestration tool as well. So let's quickly look at the policies of where we set those. Let's just take our gold one here. So where we set up what we want to do. So inside of our policy, so you're saying, I'm going to name my policy, give it a description. Really, really basic, really easy. This is what I like to call kind of like our selection or our pick a mix or our, our patchwork. You select what you want your policy to do, and it can all be built into the same policy. So where with alternative solutions, you're going to have a backup policy. You're then going to have a replication policy. You're then going to have an archive policy. You're then going to have a schedule for each one of those and a job to assign to each one of those potentially. With HYCU, you just say, okay, I want to backup. Cool. I actually want to copy, so I want a replica of this backup somewhere else. Okay, click it. I want to archive this data somewhere. Click it. I want to enable fast recovery for Nutanix environments. Click it. I want to be able to back up from replica copies using Nutanix replications. Add it. I want to scan for anomalies and I want to do threat hunting on this virtual machine. Click. Oh, all of those things are clicked. Amazing. Now I'm set up. And now I go into, okay, I need this backup to happen every 4 hours. Okay, well, tell us. Backup every 4 hours. I need to set my RTO. I need to recover this within how many hours? So 1 hour, for instance, you can change that. And I want to keep it for 4 weeks. I want to start a new backup chain here, and I want to store it on this particular set of storage. But even then, you don't even have to choose which storage you want to set it on. Based upon your information you've put up here, we can automatically assign the best suited storage. So capacity and performance management can be done from HYCU as well. Again, offloading that kind of burden that's typically on the sysadmins and the team, we can deal with that. So we can say, okay, we know that this backup storage can back up every 4 hours and recover within 1 hour for the workloads you've assigned to this policy, and we're going to store it on this particular set of storage. The same for copy. Where do I want my copies to go? different set of storage, different site, different cloud, doesn't matter to us. Archiving, what archiving do you want to do? You're getting a preset, or even you can even then choose your own. Fast restore, how many restore points do you want to enable for fast restore? How long do you want to keep them for? Do you want to back up from replica? Yes, I do. Which site do I want to, which is my central site? Where am I backing up from? And then my R shield. Do I want to assign this any VMs to this to my R shield policy to do enable anomaly detection and malware hunting? Yes, I do. So all of this in a single policy, and then you can assign this policy to your workloads. So again, just making things incredibly easy. From your guys' point of view, you set this and then truly forget about it unless we tell you something's gone wrong, right? And then you can come and investigate. But you know then HYCU is going to schedule it to run every 4 hours. It's going to tell you if you can't recover within 1 hour, and we're going to keep it for the period of time you've told us for, and hopefully you've chosen immutable storage as well, right? So all of that's done, completed without any kind of effort or real thought or planning or loads of scheduling or loads of jobs to have to deal with. So what we try and do is boil everything down into simplicity. And then for the question about Wasabi, we support pretty much most storage targets, right? So any NFS, any SMB, Nutanix block, Nutanix objects, iSCSI, Azure blob storage, S3 and S3 compatible storage as well. So we have a list of fully validated S3 compatible storage on our website as well. GCP cloud storage, QStar NFS, QStar SMB, with a unique integration with Dell Data Domain and their DD Boost. And then also in the gov environments as well. So if you are in a government entity, you can then store your data in those secure environments as well. So pretty much anything on the list for Wasabi, you just click S3 compatible. They're an S3 compatible storage provider. Right, that's all I'm going to show for demo. So I'm just going to hop back into my slides. And skip all the way through these slides because I didn't click start from where I was before. And let's do some questions real quick because we haven't got a huge amount of time. So let's look at the questions. Oh my God, we've got loads of questions. Amazing. So I've answered that one. I've answered that one. I've answered that one. Are there any specific customer benefits, advantage of HYCU protecting Nutanix AHV versus the competition? Also, is there any advantage using HYCU pointed to Nutanix NUS cluster as a target versus other targets in the market? So the first question, is there any benefits of HYCU protecting Nutanix? Yes, we have the deepest and widest integration and coverage of any backup provider in the marketplace. Without going into all the details, one of the biggest things I can tell you is Nutanix themselves uses HYCU to back up their workloads and protect their workloads, right? If there was a better, more integrated, more seamless solution to back up Nutanix workload, you'd think Nutanix would be using it, right? So that's all I can say. But yes, we have loads of things on there. We have loads of white papers and loads of 5 reasons why you should choose HYCU for Nutanix. They're out there. We can send your way as well. But yes, absolutely. And then also any advantage in HYCU pointing to NUS cluster as a target versus other targets. A lot of people that use NUS targets, they're not just using it for backup purposes, so they're kind of reutilizing their NUS storage. Another real benefit is that HYCU can actually run on top of the NUS cluster itself, so we can kind of get that full air gap away from production. So where your VMs are running and where your NUS cluster is, HYCU can sit on top of the NUS cluster and run there. So we effectively air gap from production as well. So that's kind of a big benefit that we have inside that environment. But it's down to customer choice. We work really well with NUS. We've kind of like tuned it with the engineers to make sure we can work with pretty much any NUS configuration. Whereas again, other backup vendors have to have a certain amount of this disk, that disk, and have to have certain configurations. We can pretty much use whatever you want. And I know Nutanix objects can be very competitive in the marketplace as well. So I would definitely consider them if you're using that. But also again, Dell Data Domain is very popular with our customers. Wasabi and all the public cloud providers is equally popular as well. So it's kind of dependent on strategy versus cost versus implementation versus everything else that you have as well. Do you have a solution to back up and restore VMs inside VPC on Nutanix clusters from a multi-customer platform? On a VP inside of virtual private cloud. So we do have service providers that run HYCU for the multi-tenanted platforms already. So by default, HYCU comes multi-tenanted out of the box with segregation already built in. So yes, if you're a service provider and you're running multi-tenancy Nutanix clusters, yes, you can run HYCU to back up those workloads as well. I'm hoping, Benjamin, that was the question that you asked. Does it manage Nutanix guest tools and VM tools and cross-hypervisor recovery? So at the moment, no. It does certain ones for cloud, and we're building out on that. Um, but typically, if you're going one way or the other, you would install them before you go between those environments. Um, I can just define recover with on now. What if it's 20 terabyte SQL files, a million size? So yeah, you can define that. It doesn't mean that you're going to be able to achieve that, right? And we'll then tell you. So it's a really easy way to say, yes, I want to recover within 1 hour. But if it's not possible to do that, HYCU is going to tell you that that backup is not going to be compliant, right? So maybe someone has set an unrealistic SLA, right? So your business has said everything has to be up within 1 hour, right? But you're saying, as you said, you've got a 20 terabyte SQL database that I just can't recover in that time. So you can tell them, hey, I've plumbed this into my software and it's just not possible to do. So either you give me incredibly fast all flash storage and I'll see as how low I can get it, or we need to readjust what you think is possible or readjust how we're doing disaster recovery for this particular workload, right? So, but the real benefit is if that, let's say that database was 2 terabytes, right? And it could recover within 1 hour. And then your SQL DBA dumps 18 more terabytes of data onto that and it doesn't then meet SLA, we're going to tell you about that as well. So we tell you that it was compliant. And if something changes, we tell you about if it's then no longer compliant. So it's not just at the point of backup, it's also like a continuous check to make sure that those workloads can be recovered in the time frame they need to meet their SLA compliance. So that's really, really powerful if someone does something stupid or does something silly or something just changes in the environment, maybe the storage slows down, a disk dies, something like that, then we can tell you that's no longer going to meet the compliance needs as well. The Azure logo is a bit old. Sorry, my bad. I must have copied it from a different place. Do you have any SQL support for transaction logs? Yep, we can truncate logs on demand, whatever you need to do. We also have unique integration with Nutanix NDB as well. So making sure that we plug into a time machine and make sure all the volume groups gets rearranged and all those types of things. So if you are running databases on Nutanix, you're using NDB, make sure you check out HYCU because we have probably the deepest integration with NDB in the marketplace as well. We actually we co-developed with the Nutanix engineers around NDB as well because it's quite a complex way of doing it. How about parallel backup recoveries? How many parallel recovery streams are supported? Real technical question. There, how can I answer this? So we had some an MSP, a service provider, test it, and they think they pretty much did like select all recover, and it was the storage that slowed them down, not HYCU. So that's all I can kind of tell you. We're set up to be as quickly as possible. We'll do it as quickly as the network and the storage can kind of handle it. Are backups compatible with TPM enabled VMs? Yes. Again, quite a uniqueness in the marketplace that HYCU has is that we can back up and recover VMs with VTPM enabled. Most other backup vendors can't do that, which is again another thing that we provide on top. Kind of going back to other questions, what are the advantages that HYCU has over others? These kind of things where it's not just a vanilla VM, but it's actually utilizing all of the Nutanix platform. That's where we start to see real value from HYCU, really drawing in when you start utilizing more of Nutanix and it's not just a single one VM or a very small thing to do. Once you understand the Nutanix platform and how you want it to work and how it needs to be optimized, that's when HYCU really does shine. Does HYCU provide disaster recovery protection for NKP in a Kubernetes stateful environment? So we do support NKP backups and recovery, but we don't go into the container level. We essentially do the persistent data that sits on the volume groups underneath. So yes and no in a way. So yes, we can help you recover the data, but we wouldn't be recovering the actual containers because realistically, most likely you're going to have them, in a Git file or in a file in infrastructure as code or in JSON files, whatever else it might be, to spin those up, and you can then attach the volume groups that the HYCU is replicated to a different place if you needed to. Is there something like an SLA advisor giving realistic achievable backup reasonable time windows when discussing service time with the customer? So our engineers, our customer success team are Nutanix and HYCU experts, right? We've been doing this for a long time. We've been Nutanix since our inception. Our first ever workload we supported was Nutanix. So our customer success teams have a vast amount of experience, vast amount of telemetry that they've looked at, and support cases and all those types of things. So we can typically give you really good guidance on what is possible and what's not. But we can also then size the environment right to give you we can either scale up, scale out depending on what circumstances required. So that's the difference between HYCU and again a lot of vendors. We don't have a PS engagement, right? So any customer that signs up to HYCU, they get a dedicated customer success engineer to help them on board. And customer success sometimes gets mixed up with support. We have a support team and we have a customer success team. The customer success team are there for you guys to make sure you are successful in the business outcomes you need HYCU to deliver, right? Support is there for when we have an error message and we need to fix something, right? You log a ticket and we fix it. Your customer success team is exactly this. Hey guys, I need to achieve this SLA. I need to achieve this, and this. This is why I purchased you, or this is what I'm trying to do with my POC. How can you help me design, size, configure this to achieve this? And that's what our customer success team. So yes, when you sign up or when you do POC with us, you get that person who is a real expert in setting up the platform, knowing what it can do, knowing its limitations if there are any, and knowing what needs to be done to achieve your goals as well. Do you also keep support of VM replication scheme, keeping an offline VM type platform ready to boot it up, eliminate data copy restore times? So yes, we do have a tool available for that. So again, some of our service providers do a restore every night of the last backup into their environment. So when a customer or if a customer ever needs to invoke disaster recovery, they can just essentially turn on the copy that was the last successful backup. So yes, we do have customers doing that already. So we're going okay on time. So we've only got a couple more slides, I promise you. So remember the customer story we spoke about, which seems like an age away. And thank you very much for your questions, by the way, guys. It's been really interactive. I really enjoyed, the questions. It really does make my life a lot easier to talk about things that you guys want to get the answers to, rather than just talking off my slides or talking off experience. It makes it a much more fun experience for me. So remember this customer, the healthcare customer, 120,000 patients across a large amount of sites. So they implemented HYCU R Cloud Hybrid Cloud Edition. They're protecting more than 20 sites across a large geographical area. They had over 30 terabytes protected of critical patient data, as you can imagine, being a healthcare provider. And they were utilizing that deep integration between Nutanix and HYCU. And what I mean by that, they were utilizing Nutanix replication and then backing up using HYCU at those site at the central site as well, and then enabling HYCU to then restore out to those sites if need be. So kind of minimizing the data transfer, minimizing bandwidth requirements across there. And some of the big benefits they got, obviously there's loads more that we went through, but some of the biggest benefits, they had deployment within minutes, and that is true. So when I was learning HYCU, I was speaking to Marco, one of the tech geniuses we have here at HYCU. You might have seen him on webinars and things in the past. I was kind of setting up my HYCU and said, "All right, I've done the first step. What's next?" And he's like, "That's it." I was like, "Oh." And it was up and running in like less than 15 minutes, right? It was really, really easy, really simple to do. We were up backing up VMs, and in my lab environment, I had it deployed with very limited documentation. I chose not to use the documentation to do it, to test myself. And I had it up and running within 15, 20 minutes without really knowing what I was doing, right? So imagine how quickly our customer success team can get you up and running when needed. So they've had zero outage since the deployment. So since they've put HYCU in, they've had zero outages. They've maintained 100% uptime, and they've managed to recover all of their data when needed as well. They've got single pane of glass management across the entirety of their site. So in all of their 20 sites, because HYCU is centralized in that one central location, all of their backups, their recoveries, their disaster recovery testing all comes from a single HYCU, and they can see it, they can manage it, they can monitor it all from a single place without having this, vast array of different backup proxies, agents, instances, all these other places around all these remote sites as well. And they've got quarterly DR testing down now, so they're doing that without impact, and they're currently sitting at 100% success rate on that as well, which is amazing. They're using the fastest restores possible in Nutanix to minimize any of disruptions they do have. So getting it back up within literal seconds from those Nutanix snaps we spoke about. And again, they're now doing compliance. They're meeting their compliance easier and with approval of those RTO assurances and those intuitive dashboards as well. And a lovely quote from from Roger here. He says, "HYCU is the best backup experience I've ever had. It works exceptionally well." So thank you very much for your kind words, Roger. But it really is, it hopefully as easy as I've shown it today. So if you guys are interested, make sure you scan the QR code. You can schedule a demo with people here. I'm just going to put something on the screen for a poll. So if you want to see a live custom demo, click obviously yes, and hey, if it's not for you at this time, you click no problem at all. But if you want to do that, obviously we can reach out to you guys, but also you can scan the QR code and kind of do that, or do your own POC. Any point in time, you can go onto the HYCU site and contact us, schedule demo, download the software and try it for yourself as well. So perfect. I think that is everything. I was going to go through the questions one last time. I think I've answered all the questions now. I believe I have. Perfect. So a couple of people wanting some demos. Amazing things. So yeah, thank you very much for your time, everybody. I know I said I was going to keep it short, and actually I've spoken for nearly an hour, so I apologize. But thank you very much for your attentiveness, and thank you very much for all your questions and your interactive nature. Reach out to us, connect with me on LinkedIn or whatever else. Chris Rogers, and I'll work at HYCU from the UK. You'll find me if you combine those parameters into LinkedIn. But yeah, feel free to come back and ask us any questions, or interact with us, or look at our website for any of the other webinars or data sheets or any other content you might require. So we've got loads on there, loads to learn from. And if you are interested, you can actually get qualified and become a HYCU expert as well on the site. So thank you very much for your time, and I'll see you all on the next one. Thank you very much.